During my grandmother's will reading, I noticed my uncle forge her signature on a document when the lawyer stepped out. He thought he'd secured everything, but I photographed the whole thing. And when I handed it to the attorney, his inheritance vanished. That's when the family's true colors showed. The pen moved across the paper with practiced precision, and I watched my Uncle Raymond destroy 73 years of my grandmother's legacy in under 15 seconds. He didn't know I could see him from where I sat. The antique mirror on the wall behind the lawyer's desk caught everything: his hunched shoulders, the document spread flat, his hand moving in that distinctive cursive my grandmother had used her entire life. He'd practiced her signature. He'd practiced it enough to make it look natural. And in that moment, while Attorney Gerald Whitmore was in the bathroom and my Aunt Diane was crying softly into a tissue, my Uncle Raymond Cole was stealing my grandmother's house, her savings, and everything she'd spent a lifetime building. I pulled out my phone slowly, angling it toward the mirror. The camera made no sound. 3 photos. 4. 5. Raymond folded the document, slipped it back into his briefcase, and returned to his seat like nothing had happened. When Mr. Whitmore came back into the room, Raymond smiled at him warmly. That smile made my blood turn cold. My grandmother, Eleanor Cole, died on a Wednesday morning in April, 3 weeks before her 89th birthday. She went peacefully, the hospice nurse told us, which was the only comfort we had. I'd been there the night before, sitting in the chair beside her bed, holding her hand while she slept. She'd been lucid that evening, which was rare in those final weeks. She talked about my grandfather, dead 22 years now, about the house they'd built together in 1968, about the garden she'd tended every summer until her arthritis made kneeling impossible. I spent my days staring at spreadsheets looking for anomalies, which is probably why I noticed so many things about my uncle that others missed. Raymond Cole was 58, a real estate developer who'd built a small empire in the 90s and lost most of it in 2008. He never recovered, not really, though he maintained the appearance of success through expensive suits and leased luxury cars and a house he couldn't actually afford. His wife Diane came from money, old money, but her family had cut her off years ago for reasons no one talked about. They had 2 sons, my cousins Bradley and Keith, both in their 30s, both working for their father's struggling company. The entire family operated on credit and reputation, and both were running out. My grandmother knew this. She'd bailed Raymond out twice before, once in 2009 and again in 2015, totaling nearly $400,000. She told me about it during one of our Sunday dinners, her voice tired. "He's my son," she said. What was I supposed to do? The will reading was scheduled for 2 p.m. on April 28th at the law offices of Whitmore and Associates, a firm that had handled my grandmother's affairs for over 40 years. Gerald Whitmore himself was handling the estate, a 71-year-old attorney with white hair and reading glasses that perpetually sat on the end of his nose. I arrived early, parking my car in the lot behind the building and walking in through the front entrance at 1:45. Raymond and Diane were already there, seated in the waiting area with their sons. Bradley was on his phone, scrolling mindlessly. Keith was staring at the wall. Diane was dabbing her eyes with a tissue, though I couldn't tell if the tears were real. Raymond looked up when I walked in and smiled. "Nathan, glad you could make it." The way he said it, like I was a guest at his party, like this was his show. I nodded and took a seat across from them. None of us spoke. The clock on the wall ticked toward 2. Mr. Whitmore's assistant, a young woman named Rebecca, appeared at 1:58 and led us back to the conference room where everything would fall apart. The conference room was exactly what you'd expect from a firm this old. Dark wood paneling, leather chairs, a long table with a crystal pitcher of water in the center. Family photos lined one wall, generations of Whitmores looking down at us with stern expressions. Mr. Whitmore was already seated at the head of the table, a thick folder in front of him. He stood when we entered, shaking hands with each of us, offering condolences that felt genuine. I'd met him several times over the years at my grandmother's insistence. She wanted me to know who was handling her affairs. She wanted me to trust him. "Please, have a seat, Mr. Whitmore said. "I know this is difficult, but Eleanor was very specific about her wishes, and I want to make sure we honor them properly." We sat. Raymond chose the seat closest to Mr. Whitmore, directly across from where I ended up. Diane sat beside her husband, and Bradley and Keith flanked them like bodyguards. I was alone on my side of the table, which felt appropriate. In this family, I'd always been alone. My mother was the younger sibling, the one who'd moved away, married outside the family's expectations, and produced only one child, me. When she died, I became an afterthought to everyone except my grandmother. Mr. Whitmore began reading the preliminary documents, the standard legal language that accompanies any estate. I watched Raymond's face during this portion, noting how his jaw tightened, how his fingers drummed on the table, how his eyes kept darting to the folder in front of the attorney. He was waiting for something, expecting something. "Eleanor's estate is valued at approximately $2.3 million, Mr. Whitmore said, and I saw Raymond's eyes widen slightly. "This includes the primary residence on Maple Street, valued at $850,000, various investment accounts totaling approximately $1.2 million, and personal property including jewelry, furniture, and a vehicle. 2.3 million. I hadn't known it was that much. My grandmother lived modestly, in the same house she'd shared with my grandfather, driving the same car for 15 years, wearing the same jewelry she'd had since her wedding day. She didn't believe in showing off. Raymond, on the other hand, looked like he'd just won the lottery. Now, Mr. Whitmore continued, adjusting his glasses. Regarding the distribution of assets. He paused, flipping through pages. Excuse me for just a moment. I need to retrieve an additional document from my office. He stood and walked out, leaving us alone in the conference room. That's when it happened. Raymond moved immediately, like he'd been waiting for exactly this opportunity. He opened his briefcase, pulled out a single sheet of paper, and spread it flat on the table. From my angle, I could see it was some kind of legal document, but I couldn't read the text. What I could see, reflected perfectly in that antique mirror, was Raymond pulling out a pen and signing my grandmother's name at the bottom of the page. His hand moved with practiced ease, the loops and curves of her signature flowing naturally. He'd done this before. He'd practiced. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I reached for my phone slowly, keeping my movements small, casual, like I was just checking the time. I angled it toward the mirror. Click, click, click. The photos captured everything. His hand on the pen, the document on the table, his face in profile as he finished the signature. Raymond folded the paper, tucked it back into his briefcase, and resumed his seat. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at anyone. When Mr. Whitmore returned 30 seconds later, Raymond was sitting with his hands folded, the picture of patience and grief. The will reading continued, and the truth of my grandmother's wishes became clear. She had left the house to me. The investment accounts were to be split evenly between Raymond and me, with a small portion set aside for her two grandsons, Bradley and Keith, totaling $50,000 each. The jewelry went to Diane, a gesture of kindness toward her daughter-in-law that I knew had cost my grandmother emotionally. My grandmother had been thoughtful, balanced, fair, but Raymond's face told a different story. With each provision Mr. Whitmore read, his expression darkened. He'd expected more. He'd expected everything. This can't be right, Raymond said when Mr. Whitmore finished. My mother and I discussed this. She assured me the house would come to me. Mr. Whitmore looked at him calmly. I can assure you, Raymond, this is the most recent version of Eleanor's will, signed and witnessed 8 months ago. I was present for the signing myself. Then she wasn't in her right mind. She was already showing signs of decline 8 months ago. Anyone could see that. I watched Raymond's hands clench into fists. He was losing control. I'm afraid the will is legally sound, Mr. Whitmore said. Eleanor was evaluated by her physician prior to signing. Dr. Marianne Ashford confirmed she was of sound mind. Raymond's chair scraped back as he stood, reaching for his briefcase. There's another document, he said. One my mother gave me directly for safekeeping. It supersedes what you've just read. He pulled out the paper, the one I'd watched him forge minutes ago, and slid it across the table to Mr. Whitmore. My stomach dropped. The attorney picked it up, examining it through his reading glasses. His brow furrowed. This appears to be an amendment to the will, transferring sole ownership of the primary residence to Raymond Cole, dated... He paused, looking closer. Dated 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago. My grandmother had been in hospice, barely conscious, unable to hold a pen steady enough to write her own name. I knew because I'd been there. I'd helped her sign her birthday cards with a shaky X because her hands wouldn't cooperate. That's impossible, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. I was with her 3 weeks ago. She couldn't write. Her motor function was severely compromised. Raymond turned to me, his face arranged in an expression of concern. Nathan, I understand this is difficult, but my mother was very clear about her wishes. She wanted the house to stay in the family, with someone who could maintain it properly. You're young. You rent an apartment. What would you even do with an $800,000 property? I looked at Mr. Whitmore. He was studying the document, his face troubled. May I examine this more closely? He asked Raymond. Of course. You'll find it's completely legitimate. The attorney held the paper up to the light, angling it this way and that. I could see his hesitation, his doubt. But Raymond had clearly done his homework. The forgery was good enough to fool a casual observer, maybe even good enough to survive initial scrutiny. I pulled out my phone. Mr. Whitmore, I said, before you make any determinations, I think you should see these. I opened my photos and handed him the device. His eyes widened as he scrolled through the images. Raymond's face signing the document, the mirror's reflection capturing every detail, the timestamp in the corner of each photo, 2:07 p.m., 2:07 p.m., 2:07 p.m., 3 minutes ago. What is this? Diane asked, craning her neck to see. Mr. Whitmore set the phone down carefully, like it contained something explosive. Because it did. Raymond, he said slowly, can you explain why there are photographs of you signing this document in my conference room approximately 3 minutes ago? The room went silent. I could hear the clock ticking, the distant sound of traffic outside, the soft whir of the building's climate control system. Raymond's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Confusion, denial, anger, fear. He settled on indignation. That's absurd. Those photos are fake, manipulated. Nathan has always resented me, always been jealous of my relationship with my mother. He's clearly doctored these to discredit me. I stayed calm. The photos have timestamps. They have metadata showing they were taken on this device, in this location, at exactly 2:07 p.m. Any forensic analyst can verify they haven't been altered. Nathan is a computer person, Raymond said, his voice rising. He works with data all day. He could easily fake something like this. Mr. Whitmore held up his hand. Regardless of the photo's authenticity, which can be verified independently, the document itself raises serious concerns. As Nathan mentioned, Eleanor was in hospice care 3 weeks ago. I visited her myself 2 weeks ago, and she was unable to sign her own name. Her physician can confirm her motor function was severely compromised in her final month. Raymond's face was reddening. Are you calling me a liar? Are you suggesting I forged my own mother's signature? I'm suggesting, Mr. Whitmore said carefully, that we need to verify the authenticity of this document before proceeding. I'm going to recommend we bring in a forensic document examiner to analyze the signature. Additionally, I'll be contacting the authorities, as the allegations being made constitute potential criminal fraud. Raymond slammed his hand on the table. Diane jumped. Bradley and Keith exchanged nervous glances. This is ridiculous. I'm her son. I have every right to her estate. That house should be mine. It was always supposed to be mine. She promised me. She didn't promise you anything, I said quietly. She told me you'd been circling. Those were her exact words. Raymond's been circling. She knew you'd try something like this. That's why she made sure everything was documented, verified, witnessed. She knew. Raymond turned on me, his face twisted with rage. You sanctimonious little prick. You think you're so special because she doted on you? You were a charity case, a pity project. Your mother was a disappointment who married beneath her station and died young, and you were the leftover she felt obligated to care for. The words hit like physical blows, but I didn't flinch. I'd spent years learning not to react to Raymond's cruelty. Say whatever you want about me, I said, but don't talk about my mother, and don't think for a second that you're getting away with this. Mr. Whitmore stood, his face grave. I'm going to ask everyone to leave. This reading is suspended pending investigation. Raymond, I strongly advise you to retain independent legal counsel. The evidence presented today is serious, and I will be reporting this to the appropriate authorities. Raymond grabbed his briefcase. You'll hear from my lawyer, he said. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. He stormed out, Diane hurrying after him. Bradley and Keith followed, though Keith paused at the door and looked back at me. His expression was strange, almost apologetic. Then he was gone, and it was just me and Mr. Whitmore in the conference room. Nathan, the attorney said, sinking back into his chair, I need you to send me those photographs immediately. I also need you to preserve your phone and its contents. This will likely become evidence in a criminal case. I nodded, my hands finally starting to shake now that the confrontation was over. I'll send them right now. Your grandmother was right about you, Mr. Whitmore said quietly. She told me you were the only one she could trust. She said, if anything happens, Nathan will know what to do. I didn't fully understand what she meant until today. The next 3 days were a blur of phone calls, emails, and meetings with people I'd never expected to meet. Mr. Whitmore connected me with Detective Frank Moreno from the Economic Crimes Unit, a 30-year veteran with a reputation for taking white-collar criminals seriously. He was a compact man with graying temples and sharp eyes that missed nothing. We met at the police station the day after the will reading, in a small interview room that smelled like stale coffee. Walk me through exactly what you saw, Detective Moreno said, a recorder running on the table between us. I told him everything, the mirror, the document, Raymond's practiced movements, the photos I'd taken. I showed him the images on my phone, now backed up to 3 separate cloud services at the detective's recommendation. These are damning, he said, zooming in on one of the photos. You can clearly see his hand, the pen, the document, and the timestamp matches the approximate time the attorney left the room. Will it be enough? I asked. It's a start. We'll need the document itself analyzed by a forensic examiner. I'm going to recommend Dr. Constance Verity. She's testified in dozens of fraud cases, certified by the American Board of Forensic Document Examiners. If there's anything wrong with that signature, she'll find it. Dr. Verity examined the document 3 days later at her laboratory. I wasn't present, but Detective Moreno called me with the results. It's a forgery, he said. No question. The signature was created using a technique called tracing with variation, where someone practices copying a signature multiple times and then writes it freehand to avoid the telltale signs of direct tracing. But Dr. Verity found micro-hesitations in the stroke patterns, inconsistencies in the pen pressure, and evidence that the ink was applied over a period of several minutes rather than in one fluid motion. He paused. Additionally, the paper itself is problematic. It's a type of legal paper that Mr. Whitmore's office stopped using 6 months ago. Whoever prepared this document didn't know that. Raymond had made a mistake. A small one, but fatal to his scheme. What happens now? I asked. We arrest him. The DA is preparing charges for forgery in the first degree and attempted grand theft. Given the value of the property involved, He's looking at potential felony charges with significant prison time. I hung up the phone and sat in my apartment, staring at the wall. My uncle was going to be arrested. The man who'd called my mother a disappointment, who'd called me a charity case, who'd tried to steal my grandmother's house with a forged signature, was going to face justice. But Raymond wasn't going down without a fight. 3 days after the forensic analysis, before an arrest warrant could be issued, he hired a criminal defense attorney named Lawrence Goodwin, a high-powered lawyer known for representing wealthy clients accused of financial crimes. Goodwin filed a motion to suppress the photographs I'd taken, arguing they were obtained through surveillance without consent and violated Raymond's reasonable expectation of privacy. The argument was absurd, since I'd simply observed something happening in plain view in a shared space, but it succeeded in delaying the arrest while the legal issues were sorted out. Meanwhile, Raymond launched a parallel campaign to destroy my credibility. He called family members, distant cousins, and relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, telling them I'd manipulated my grandmother in her final months, that I'd isolated her from her family, that I'd poisoned her against her own son. Some of them believed him. I started receiving messages from people I barely knew, accusing me of elder abuse, of undue influence, of stealing from a dying woman. "You should be ashamed," one message read. "Eleanor would be disgusted by what you've become." The harassment escalated over the following weeks. Someone slashed the tires on my car. I started receiving threatening phone calls from blocked numbers, always late at night, always silent, except for heavy breathing. My mailbox was filled with printed copies of my grandmother's obituary, defaced with words like thief and liar written in red marker. I reported everything to Detective Moreno, who documented each incident, but explained there wasn't enough evidence to prove Raymond was directly responsible. "He's smart," Moreno said. "He's using proxies. Maybe his sons, maybe friends. But he's keeping his own hands clean." I installed security cameras around my apartment building, changed my phone number, and started parking in different locations each night. I was living like a fugitive, afraid in my own city, because my uncle couldn't accept that he wasn't entitled to everything he wanted. "Mr. Whitmore called me during this period, his voice troubled. "Nathan, I've received 3 separate communications from Mr. Goodwin threatening defamation lawsuits if I proceed with reporting Raymond to the authorities. He's claiming the forensic analysis was biased, that Dr. Verity has a grudge against him, that the entire case is a conspiracy. Is any of that true? Of course not, but he's creating noise, muddying the waters, making this as expensive and difficult as possible." The court hearing on the motion to suppress was scheduled for a Monday morning in late May. I arrived at the courthouse at 8:30 a.m., dressed in my best suit, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. Mr. Whitmore met me in the lobby, along with the assistant DA assigned to the case, a young prosecutor named Alicia Drummond, who looked barely older than me, but had a reputation for being ruthless in the courtroom. "The judge is Eleanor Fairbanks," Drummond told me as we walked toward the courtroom. "She's no nonsense, doesn't tolerate games. That works in our favor." Raymond was already inside when we entered, seated at the defense table with Goodwin. He was wearing an expensive charcoal suit and an expression of wounded innocence. Diane sat in the gallery behind him, along with Bradley and Keith. They all stared at me as I took my seat. Judge Fairbanks, a stern-faced woman in her 60s, entered precisely at 9 a.m. "We're here to address the defense motion to suppress photographic evidence in the matter of People versus Raymond Cole. Mr. Goodwin, you may proceed." Goodwin stood, buttoning his jacket. "Your Honor, the photographs in question were taken without my client's knowledge or consent, in what he reasonably believed was a private setting. The conference room of an attorney's office carries an expectation of confidentiality." Drummond was on her feet before Goodwin finished. "Objection, Your Honor. The defendant was in a shared space with multiple other parties present. There is no reasonable expectation of privacy when committing a criminal act in plain view of others." Judge Fairbanks held up her hand. "I'll hear arguments from both sides. Mr. Goodwin, continue." The arguments went back and forth for nearly an hour. Goodwin tried every angle. The photos were taken using surveillance technology, meaning my phone. I had a financial motive to fabricate evidence. The attorney-client privilege of the conference room extended to all communications within it. Drummond countered each point methodically, citing precedent after precedent, demonstrating that the law was clearly on our side. Finally, Judge Fairbanks had heard enough. "The motion to suppress is denied," she said. "The photographs were taken in a shared space where the defendant had no reasonable expectation of privacy, particularly while allegedly committing a criminal act. The evidence is admissible." Raymond's face went pale. Goodwin leaned over to whisper something in his ear, but Raymond shook his head violently. "This is a travesty," he said loudly enough for the whole courtroom to hear. "I'm being railroaded by a vindictive nephew and a corrupt system." Judge Fairbanks fixed him with a cold stare. "Mr. Cole, one more outburst and I'll hold you in contempt. Mr. Goodwin, control your client." The arrest happened 2 days later. Detective Moreno called me that morning. "We're picking him up at his house in about an hour. Thought you'd want to know." I didn't go to watch. As much as part of me wanted to see Raymond in handcuffs, another part of me knew it wouldn't bring satisfaction. Nothing would bring my grandmother back. Nothing would undo the things he'd said about my mother. Seeing him humiliated wouldn't heal those wounds. But I did watch the news that evening. The story ran on the local station at 6 p.m. Local real estate developer Raymond Cole was arrested today on charges of forgery and attempted grand theft, the anchor said. Cole allegedly forged his deceased mother's signature on a document intended to transfer property valued at over $800,000 to himself. The scheme was uncovered when a family member photographed Cole committing the forgery during the reading of the will. They showed Raymond being led from his house in handcuffs, his face contorted with rage. Diane stood in the doorway, crying. I felt nothing, just a hollow emptiness where anger used to be. The trial took place 4 months later. By then, the case had expanded significantly. During the investigation, Detective Moreno discovered that Raymond had forged other documents over the years, including a power of attorney he'd used to access my grandmother's accounts while she was in hospice. He'd withdrawn nearly $80,000 in the 6 weeks before her death, money that was supposed to go toward her medical care. Some of it had been used to pay off his credit cards. Some had gone to a gambling website. The forensic accountants traced every penny. The trial lasted 9 days. I testified on the 3rd day, walking the jury through what I'd witnessed in the conference room, explaining my relationship with my grandmother, describing the harassment I'd endured in the months since. Goodwin tried to paint me as a greedy opportunist, but his cross-examination fell flat. I had documentation for everything: the photos, the timestamps, the security camera footage from my apartment building showing the vandalism, the phone records proving the threatening calls. Dr. Verity testified about the forged signature. Detective Moreno laid out the financial crimes. Mr. Whitmore explained my grandmother's true wishes and the lengths she'd gone to in order to protect her estate from her own son. The jury deliberated for 4 hours before returning a verdict: guilty on all counts. Raymond was sentenced to 7 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole after 4. Judge Fairbanks, who had been assigned the trial as well, delivered the sentence with visible disgust. Mr. Cole, you exploited the death of your own mother to enrich yourself. You forged documents, stole from her accounts, and then attempted to intimidate and harass the one family member who had the courage to stop you. The court has no sympathy for your situation. Raymond's face crumpled. For the first time since this all began, he looked truly broken. Not angry, not defiant, just old and tired and defeated. Diane sat in the gallery, stone-faced. Bradley and Keith were nowhere to be seen. They'd distanced themselves from their father as the trial progressed, apparently deciding that family loyalty only went so far when prison time was involved. I didn't speak to Raymond before they led him away. There was nothing left to say. I walked out of the courthouse into the September sunshine and stood on the steps, breathing deeply. It was over. 8 months of investigation and trial and testimony, and it was finally over. Mr. Whitmore found me there a few minutes later. How do you feel? I thought about it. Empty, relieved, sad. All reasonable responses, he said. Your grandmother would be proud of you. The estate was settled 3 weeks after the sentencing. The house on Maple Street became mine, along with my share of the investment accounts. After legal fees and the recovery of the stolen funds, the total came to approximately $1.4 million. More money than I'd ever imagined having. I didn't move into the house right away. It felt wrong, somehow, to live in a place that had caused so much pain. Instead, I hired a property management company to maintain it while I figured out what to do. In the meantime, I visited often, walking through the rooms my grandmother had loved, touching the furniture she'd chosen, standing in the garden where she'd spent so many happy hours. The investigation had uncovered something else, something Raymond hadn't known about. My grandmother had kept a journal in her final year, documenting her fears about her son, her hopes for me, her wishes for the future. Mr. Whitmore gave it to me after the trial, sealed in an envelope with my name on it. She wanted you to have this when everything was resolved, he said. I read it alone, in her garden, on a cool October afternoon. Her handwriting was shaky but legible, her words clear and filled with love. Nathan, she wrote in the final entry, dated 2 weeks before her death. If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and everything has happened as I feared it would. Raymond has tried to take what isn't his, and you've stopped him. I knew you would. From the moment your mother died and you came to live with me, I knew you were special. Not because of what you could do, but because of who you were. You were kind in a family that valued cruelty. You were honest in a family that lived on lies. You were everything I wished my own son could have been. I had to stop reading for a moment. The tears were making the words blur. Don't let this experience harden you, she continued. Don't become bitter or vengeful. I've seen what that does to people. I watched it destroy Raymond, watched him become someone I couldn't recognize, someone driven by greed and entitlement and rage. You're better than that. You were always better than that. I love you, sweetheart, more than I ever told you, more than I ever showed you. Take care of the house, or sell it, or do whatever makes you happy. But remember that the things that matter aren't things at all. They're the people we love and the choices we make. Choose kindness. Choose honesty. Choose to be the person I always knew you were. I sold the house 6 months later to a young family with 3 children and a golden retriever. They loved it immediately: the garden, the big kitchen, the wraparound porch where my grandmother used to sit on summer evenings. I used part of the money to pay off my student loans and part to establish a scholarship fund in my mother's name at her alma mater. The rest went into savings, where it sits mostly untouched. I don't need much. I never did. Raymond is still in prison. I received a letter from him about a year after his conviction, a rambling apology that blamed everyone but himself for what had happened. I didn't respond. Some relationships can't be repaired. Some people don't deserve forgiveness. Diane divorced him while he was incarcerated and moved to Florida. Bradley reached out to me once, awkwardly, to apologize for his father's behavior. I accepted the apology, but declined his suggestion that we get together sometime and reconnect. Some bridges, once burned, stay burned. Keith I never heard from at all. I think of my grandmother often, especially in the spring, when the flowers bloom and the air smells like the garden she loved. I think of her strength, her foresight, her faith in me. And I think about what she wrote in that final journal entry, about choosing kindness and honesty, about being the person she always knew I was. I'm 28 now, still working at the investment firm, still living in the same small apartment I had before any of this happened. The money hasn't changed me, not really. What changed me was standing up to someone who thought he could take whatever he wanted because he believed he was entitled to it. What changed me was learning that the people who should love you unconditionally sometimes don't, and that family isn't about blood or obligation, it's about choice. My grandmother chose me. She saw something in me worth protecting, worth trusting, worth leaving her legacy to. And when the moment came, I chose her right back. I chose to honor her wishes, to protect what she'd built, to stand against someone who thought power and intimidation could erase the truth. He was wrong. Raymond Cole thought he'd secured everything when he forged that signature. He thought wealth and lawyers and lies could make reality bend to his will. But he forgot one thing. Someone was watching. Someone who loved the woman he was trying to steal from. Someone who wouldn't let him get away with it. My grandmother told me once that the truth has a way of coming out, no matter how hard people try to bury it. She was right. She was always right. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.